A 69-foot wooden luxury yacht, the MV Joyita, built from heavy 2-inch cedar planking on oak frames, weighing 70 tons. She's listing heavily to one side, drifting aimlessly through the glass-like surface of the South Pacific, and the silence on deck is absolute. When rescuers finally boarded, they found a ghost ship. No one was on board. The crew and passengers, including 2 small children, had vanished. Despite tons of cargo remaining in the hold, the life rafts had been launched. Everyone had disappeared into the oppressive, humid heat of the Pacific, leaving behind a ship that was physically incapable of sinking. We're going to look at the specific, chilling clues that prove the crew knew they were in trouble, but were blind to the fact that the ship was actually the safest place they could be. Before we dive into the mystery, subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales of the deep. Long before the disaster, this vessel was a floating monument to Hollywood luxury. In 1931, director Roland West commissioned her from the Wilmington Boat Works in Los Angeles. He named her after his wife, the actress Jewel Carmen. Joyita is Spanish for Little Jewel. Her design, however, was far more rugged than her name suggested. Marine architect Ted Geary based the blueprints on an Alaskan cannery tender, giving her a tuna clipper profile capable of weathering the most violent Pacific storms. Below the waterline, she was powered by twin-diesel 120-horsepower Atlas engines, equipped with an automatic pilot and massive ice boxes for big-game fishing. But the ship's history had already begun to flicker. In April 1936, she was sold to Milton E. Bacon, who sailed her through Mexico and San Francisco, where she even appeared at the Golden Gate International Exposition. Following the attacks on Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy requisitioned her as a patrol boat in Hawaii. In 1943, the vessel ran aground, slamming into the seabed. The damage to her wooden hull was significant, requiring extensive repairs. By 1946, the Louis Brothers firm purchased the Joyita, stripping away the luxury to convert her into a merchant vessel for commercial trade. But beneath the deck, the replacement pipework from that 1943 grounding was already beginning to corrode, a slow poison eating away at the ship's veins. Thomas Henry Miller, known to everyone in Samoa as Dusty, was not your typical charter captain. He was a former lieutenant commander in the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, a British-born seaman with a reputation for adventure that stretched across the South Pacific. By 1952, the ship had come into the possession of Dr. Catherine Luamala, an American anthropologist from the University of Hawaii. She trusted Dusty, chartering the vessel to him, but the man behind the adventurous facade was crumbling. By 1955, Captain Miller was drowning in debt and struggling to survive financially. He was desperate for a windfall. He had attempted to sell the vessel, asking $70,000, but the government of Fiji balked at the price. During its 1946 conversion, the lower interiors had been stripped to make room for refrigeration equipment. They had installed 640 cubic feet of cork insulation in 5-inch slabs. This massive volume of cork, roughly 18 cubic meters, meant that the Joyita was, for all practical purposes, a floating fortress. She was virtually unsinkable. Roger Derrick Peerless, the district officer of the Tokelau Islands, had a simple, vital goal: establish a reliable transport link between Tokelau and Samoa. It was a desperate need for a population of 1,593 people living across a total land area of only 10 square kilometers, barely 4 square miles of coral and salt. To solve this, the shipping firm Coxon & Company chartered the vessel. On Monday, October 3rd, 1955, at 5 a.m., the Joyita slipped out of Apia, Western Samoa. 25 people were on board. The manifest was a mix of official duty and family. 9 passengers, including Peerless, Dr. Alfred Dennis Parsons, pharmacists Herbert T. Hodgkinson and Takama Panana, along with Panana's wife and 2 adopted children, aged 3 and 11. Supporting them was a 16-man crew, including bosun Takoka Tuika, engineer Abaram Tanini, and first mate Charles R. Simpson. Their hold was packed for the remote islands: medical supplies, timber, foodstuffs, flour, sugar, and rice, and 80 empty 45-gallon oil drums for construction. They had 2,640 gallons of fuel in the tanks, enough to cover nearly 3,000 miles. It was more than enough for the 270 nautical miles to Whakaofo. But the departure was flawed from the start. The ship was actually scheduled to sail at noon the previous day, but Captain Miller had faced a mechanical failure. The port engine clutch was partially disconnected. Instead of waiting for a full repair, Miller pushed forward. The Joyita began its journey relying on only the starboard engine. 5 weeks of silence broke on November 10th, 1955. Captain Gerald Douglas, standing on the bridge of the merchant vessel Tuvalu, spotted a shape on the horizon that should not have been there. It was the Joyita, wallowing in the swell, partially submerged and listing heavily to port. When the boarding party crossed onto the deck, they were met with absolute silence. Approximately 4 tons of cargo were missing from the hold, leaving behind empty, salt-crusted voids where the medical supplies and timber should have been. It was not just the absence of life that unsettled the rescuers. It was the specific state of the items left behind. The doctor's medical bag lay open, spilling its contents across the wood. Someone was bleeding, and they were trying to fix it while the world tilted. But the most damning evidence sat in the radio room. The operator had correctly tuned the radio telephone to the International Marine Distress Channel, yet a brutal break in the aerial connection had crippled the equipment, limiting its effective range to a mere 2 miles. Their desperation was trapped within a 2-mile radius, leaving them unheard in the vastness of the Pacific. The core of the mystery rests in the physics of the vessel itself. That 640 cubic feet of cork insulation acted as a permanent buoyancy aid. Even if the Joyita had taken on significant water, even if the lower decks had been completely flooded, the structural integrity of that cork lining would have prevented the ship from slipping beneath the waves. She was a bathtub that refused to sink. When the investigators examined the hold, they found the source of the flooding. A corroded pipe had failed, and the bilge pumps, clogged with debris, had been unable to clear the intake. The ship was listing because the water had accumulated in the bilges, but she was never in danger of going down. The crew had abandoned a vessel that was, in reality, far safer than the tiny, open-air life rafts they cast into the swell. The horizon at Whakaofo remained vacant by noon on Wednesday, October 5th. The Joyita failed to dock as scheduled. By Thursday, October 6th, the authorities officially reported the vessel overdue. A chilling detail persists. The weather logs from those days indicate perfectly calm conditions, and not a single distress call reached any listening station. The Royal New Zealand Air Force mobilized immediately. They deployed Sunderland flying boats to scour the region. Between October 6th and 12th, and again from November 6th to 12th, these pilots scanned the vast expanse. The effort expanded to cover nearly 100,000 square miles of open water. To put that in perspective, that is an area roughly the size of the state of Colorado, searched for a single wooden boat. Pilots flew over an ocean that refused to yield its secrets. Every flight hour increased the weight of the impossibility. They were hunting for a vessel that had ceased to exist in the known world, leaving behind no wreckage, no debris, and no voice to explain the silent departure. In the vacuum of information, theories flourished. Some speculated about Soviet submarines surfacing in the Pacific, seizing the vessel for its radio equipment and silencing the crew. Others turned their eyes toward Japanese fishermen, claiming they had encountered the Joyita and disposed of the occupants to hide evidence of illegal fishing in territorial waters. Then there was the darker, more domestic theory: insurance fraud. With Captain Miller facing total financial ruin, the authorities examined the possibility that he had orchestrated a disappearance to claim a payout that never materialized. Each theory sought a villain, a tangible cause for such a clean vanishing act, yet none offered a shred of physical proof. What remains most difficult to process is the decision-making process in the dark. It's easy to judge from the safety of dry land, but one must consider the pressure. In that hold, with the water rising and the bilge pumps failing, the panic must have been absolute. They were not just facing an engine failure, they were facing the silence of the ocean. It's haunting to think of them preparing to leave. They were not jumping into safety. They were trading a flawed, listing, but buoyant home for the unknown mercy of the Pacific currents. Their mistake was not the sea, but their lack of faith in the steel and cedar beneath their feet. The Joyita did not vanish with her passengers. She was salvaged, returned to Apia, and eventually sold to a succession of owners who found little luck in her hull. She ran aground again in 1959, and in the years that followed, she drifted between commercial utility and ignominy. She was eventually scrapped, her story ending not with a final dramatic sinking, but with the slow dismantling of her structure. The tragedy was not just in the loss of 25 lives, but in the lack of closure. No inquest ever fully explained the sequence of events. No bodies were recovered. The 25 souls simply ceased to be. At 10:25 p.m. on that October night, time on the ship effectively stopped, the clocks halting as if marking the moment the crew chose to abandon their vessel. The Joyita was found drifting 600 miles off her intended course, a scarred, empty shell floating in the middle of the Pacific. 25 people walked off that ship and into the void. They were victims of a paradox. They fled a ship that could not sink, and in doing so, they moved from a place of survival into an environment that offered none. The irony remains sharp and cold. They spent their final moments fighting a vessel that would have carried them to safety had they simply stayed in the hold. They abandoned their only chance at survival, and the Pacific swallowed the truth of why. If you enjoyed this dive into the Joyita mystery, please subscribe for more unsolved disappearances.